Hello, my name is Frank Norman, and I'm librarian at the Francis Crick Institute, which is a biomedical research institute in London. I'm going to talk to you today about changes in biomedical research publishing. This is the agenda I've set, so 6 sections. And I'm going to start talking about print, going back to the early 1990s. So 30 years ago, journals were published in print and read in print. It was all print. Our headaches at that time were all about the increasing prices of journal subscriptions and the consequent need to cancel journal subscriptions, and also the need to find storage space for this ever-growing print collection. And then in the early 1990s, the internet came along. It was still quite niche at that time, but even early on, it was being used for scholarly communications. So some new kinds of journals were created by switched on academics, and these were sent out by email, so quite primitive, and then some appeared on simple websites. A little later, regular journal publishers started toying with putting their journal content, their legacy content, onto websites. The PDF format was invented as a way to create an electronic version of an article that retained the page structure. It looked just the same as the printed page. This was a great advance, but has proved to be quite a straitjacket. So existing journals became electronic, but the publishers still retained the print versions, as many people were still using those. And so the electronic versions were held back by this tie back to the print, and they still are to some extent. For instance, we still have this PDF format, and we still have to pay color printing charges for some journals. The Journal of Biological Chemistry was one of the biggest journals in terms of the number of articles published. It took up masses of space on the shelf. And it was one of the first major journals to introduce a full electronic version. That was in 1995. It was the first title on the new Highwire Press publishing platform, and it set the pattern for many other learned society journals. Some years later, the JBC also was one of the first journals to abandon its print edition in 2012. And it's continuing to pioneer. From next January, it will flip to being fully open access, and it's switching also to being published by Elsevier. A little bit later on, mid-90s, we saw the early days of open access. So the physicists created something called arXiv, which was a system for freely sharing physics preprints, and that was in 1991. This gentleman is Stefan Harnad, and in 1994, he published what he called Subversive Proposal, where he urged every researcher to make each of their papers available for free on the internet. He hoped to somehow mirror the preprinting behavior that the physicists had adopted. Subsequently, this so-called self-archiving was called green open access. This was based on the categorization of journals on a popular website, Sherpa Romeo. So green meant that you can archive the preprint and postprint. But this practice of self-archiving didn't spread as Harnett had hoped. It got a bit of a boost in 1999 when the US National Institutes for Health published their eBiomed proposal. This would have mandated preprinting for all NIH-funded research, but publishers and researchers alike rejected that idea. eBiomed did give birth to something called PubMed Central, which was created by the NIH in the year 2000. This was a repository for biomedical research papers. And in 2007, a mirror site was launched, which became Europe PubMed Central. So these are still very important parts of the biomedical scholarly communication system now. Another response to the NIH's proposal was a company called Biomed Central. This was a company that specialized in open access. They claimed to be the first open access science publisher, and they were founded in 2000. So authors paid the publisher for the peer review and editing services, and publishers published the author's manuscript as a research paper online. Readers of the paper then had to pay nothing, so it was paid to publish, free to read. This proved to be a successful strategy, a successful publishing model, and Biomed Central were followed by others, notably PLOS Biology in 2003. By October 2020, the Directory of Open Access Journals, DOAJ, now lists more than 15,000 open access journals. I should say that many open access journals do not impose publishing charges. But Biomed Central is still going. It's now been bought up by the giant publisher Springer Nature, and it's part of their portfolio. The failure of self-archiving, or Green OA, to really take root made it clear that something more was needed to persuade researchers to practice open access. Research funders realized that they have power over researchers. So they said, we give you your research money, we can attach conditions to how you publish. We think that research results should be made open access, so you must make your work open access, or we'll put financial penalties on your research grant. So the Wellcome Trust was one of the first funders to introduce an open access policy. Mark Walport, who was then head of Wellcome, complained that Wellcome was funding research to the tune of hundreds of millions of pounds, but sitting in his office in the Wellcome Trust, he was unable to read the results of that research without paying publishers to gain access to it. Quite soon after this, the Medical Research Council followed Wellcome's lead in 2006. So these two policies really kick-started biomedical open access in the UK. And it also gave librarians a whole load of new jobs and new things to worry about. Publishers gradually introduced policies that enabled their journals to be conforming with these new open access policies from the funders, either by the green self-archiving route or the gold, typically paid open access route. So we have open access taking root. Now is a good time, it seems, for more innovations. Moving on in time, so to round about the mid-2000s, in 2006, PLOS One was launched. Its aims were not just to provide an inclusive open access platform for scientific articles, but also to change the nature of research publishing. So papers were rejected not on the basis of subjective justifications like, is it topical, is it novel, but any paper that made a valuable contribution to the scientific literature, that are replicable, that are clearly written, and whose conclusions are supported by the data would be published. So that's the crucial part. The conclusions are supported by the data. It's valid science. It deserves to be published. By 2011, PLOS One had published nearly 30,000 papers. It became the largest journal in terms of the numbers of papers published per annum, exceeding even the Journal of Biological Chemistry. And it spawned a new word, the Megajournal. Many other megajournals followed, notably Scientific Reports, which was from Nature Publishing Group. Scientific Reports also became rapidly very large, and it grew even larger than PLOS One in terms of the numbers of papers published per annum. A feature in Science magazine last year reported that both of these titles had seen submissions falling as other publishers joined in to publish their own mega journal, including Science magazine, actually. There have been questions about mega journals from doubters about the nature of the peer review, the quality of the peer review. But mega journals also have many defenders, and it's fair to say that they've found a solid place in scholarly publishing. Other innovations relate to peer review. I remember in the early days of open access, the enthusiasts insisted that open access was not a challenge to peer review. Peer review was here to stay, it was necessary. There was a big House of Commons Select Committee report on peer review in scientific publications in 2011. And this outlines the importance of peer review, but also voices some criticisms of peer review and how it could be improved. More recently, there's been more discussion and more experimentation in peer review. So the journal F1000 Research was established with an open peer review publishing model. The way it works is you submit an article, that article goes through very light checks, and it's then posted online. Reviewers are invited to add their assessments of the article, and these are posted online. Authors can respond to the reviewers' comments, and these are posted online. Several research funders have set up publishing platforms based on this model. For instance, Gates Open Research and Wellcome Open Research are notable examples. Another open access journal publisher, Frontiers, have embraced some degree of openness. They publish all referee names, and the EMBO journal also publishes a file about the review process, although referees remain anonymous. And finally, a journal called eLife publishes the decision letter and the author's response to that letter as part of the article. Other journals have seen some optional opening up of review reports and referee names. 2 years ago, there was a big campaign to make reviewers' comments part of the official scientific record, and a declaration that people could sign. Several hundred journals committed to publishing peer review reports. New journals like eLife and Frontiers have also moved to a more collaborative and interactive style of peer review between the editors and reviewers. This tries to ensure that the comments stay constructive. Frontiers journals also include the authors in the conversation. This seems popular with these authors. And these initiatives are driven both by the desire to improve peer review, but also by the development of online systems that can support this kind of dialogue. If a manuscript is rejected by one journal, authors will submit it to another journal, and this may happen several times for a single manuscript, resulting in multiple instances of peer review. Clearly, this is wasteful and also time-consuming, delaying publishing. Publishers may have a way to share peer reviews within their own stable of journals, and some now also collaborating cross-publisher to transfer manuscripts and peer reviews. We expect to see more of these initiatives. There are also some services that provide an independent peer review for a manuscript, so aside from any journal. And they call this transferable peer review. Peerage of Science is one example of a company that is doing this. Peer review is also starting to be seen as a research output in itself. Peer review is a task which is generally carried out for free as part of a researcher's professional duties, but it's an invisible activity. You get no credit for the time spent reviewing. All those words you write in the review are never widely seen. the Publons service is an attempt to correct that, to allow you to record the number of reviews that you undertake, and if possible, to share them too, although quite often the publisher doesn't allow that. The ultimate revolution in peer review, of course, is to dispense with it altogether. And this is where preprints come in. We mentioned them back in 1991 with the physicists. A preprint is the non-peer-reviewed version of a manuscript before it's had any peer review. With a preprint, the onus is on the reader to judge for themselves whether they can rely on the research reported. In physics, as I say, they've been shared for a long while. In biology, back in 1999, I mentioned eBiomed and the resistance to the idea of preprints then. But Richard Seaver and John Inglis from the Cold Spring Harbor Labs in Publishing Press in the States decided in 2013 that the time had come to try again for biologists. They'd seen that within the physics preprint server archive, there was a growing number of computational biology preprints being posted, and they thought perhaps biologists were coming around to the idea. So they established bioRxiv, and they crucially persuaded many publishers to agree that they would consider for publication manuscripts which had previously been posted in bioRxiv. Very few publishers refused, so nearly all biomedical journals will consider manuscripts that have previously been preprinted. And soon research funders were also supporting preprints, giving them a bioRxiv further backing. All of this in 2013 was not long after the so-called academic spring of 2012, when for a while it seemed that open access was going mainstream. So it may be that many researchers this time were fired up for change and decided to give preprints a go. Researchers and funders joined together and set up a body called ASAP Bio, Accelerating Science and Publication in Biology. And this group made the case for preprints in biology, and they helped to spread the word about the benefits of preprints. So bioRxiv submissions grew quickly year on year, although there are still a small percentage of the total number of papers that are published in biomedicine. Other preprint servers have followed in other subjects, and some preprint servers covering particular countries or regions. So there's quite a rich ecosystem now of preprint servers. During COVID, preprints have really come into their own, facilitating rapid dissemination of COVID-related science. The Richard Seaver from bioRxiv says that in the first SARS outbreak in 2003, 93% of research into that subject was published well after the outbreak finished. But in this one, nearly everything is being published as a preprint. So so both bioRxiv and medRxiv have published huge numbers of preprints relating to COVID. So where next? In 2018, a group of more than a dozen different research funders announced a new strategy to achieve open access for research. They called this Plan S. It has been pretty controversial and comes into effect from the 1st of January 2021. So they want immediate open access, no more 6-month delays to open access. The research outputs must always have a CC BY license enabling reuse. And the Plan S funders will not allow payments to hybrid journals for open access any longer. So this is all quite challenging. It requires changes from publishers and or changes in where researchers publish. Hybrid journals over the past 15 years have delivered an awful lot of open access articles. So some see them as a good thing, but they've ended up being a preserver of the status quo. And the funders have observed that hybrid journals, hybrid open access has not produced structural change in publishing to make open access the default. So they want to stop putting their money into hybrid journals. So there are three routes to compliance with Plan S. You either publish in a fully open access journal, or you publish in a journal that has declared itself to be a transformative journal, or with a publisher that has a transformative agreement. So these are basically, they've expressed their ambition to become fully open access within a short space of time up to the end of 2024. And the third route is self-archiving. That's the old green open access. So we're seeing now open access is an established business model. A number of learned society publishers who have perhaps less experience with this are now working more closely with commercial publishers. As I said, Journal of Biological Chemistry is moving to Elsevier, but also Blood is moving to Elsevier, and the Institution of Engineering and Technology are putting all their journals with Wiley's. So we expect to see more of these moves. It's a bit ironic that the effect of Plan S is to drive learned societies into the arms of big commercial publishers. We may also see further consolidation of the larger publishers and the medium-sized publishers. Much rides on the transformative stroke read and publish agreements and the transformative journals. As I said, they have until the end of 2024 to switch to full OA. My worry is that they may end up, just like hybrid journals, keeping the status quo going rather than effecting change. PLOS, which is already a full open access publisher, is looking further ahead with their community action publishing model. So they're looking to eliminate article processing charges, or APCs, by having an institutional agreement on an annual basis. The commentator David Warlock has praised this initiative from PLOS and sees it as a way of the future. Funder platforms, where the research funder sets up its own publishing platform and covers all of the publishing costs up front, are another way of avoiding APCs. And preprints, we've talked quite a bit about. I expect to see preprints continue to develop. Interestingly, the developers of bioRxiv responded to Plan S with their own proposal called Plan U, which was to mandate preprints and encourage new peer review initiatives. It's an interesting proposal, but I think there are some challenges to putting it into effect. But I should say that there are a number of new peer review initiatives for preprints, which are quite interesting, and they seem to be proliferating. And finally, an area that I've not touched on at all is research evaluation. DORA, the San Francisco Declaration on Research Assessment, has led the way in trying to reform the reliance of research assessment on journal brand, and they're introducing the idea of responsible metrics. There's a long way to go on this. Plan S emphasizes that DORA compliance is a necessity, but it takes time to change our ways of thinking. So in summary, I'd say publishing has been and is being transformed by technology, but the legacy of print has cast a long shadow and still is influential today. Funders of research now have a big influence in research publishing, and they're exercising that increasingly. Open access is still pretty complicated in terms of the different routes to open access on all the different players and influencers. Innovation in publishing is more important than ever. Preprints are here to stay. I think they're going to be an important part of publishing in the future. And responsible metrics are now entangled with publishing. We can't ignore responsible metrics if we're interested in publishing. Thank you for listening, and good luck with the rest of your course.